At some point after the age of 60, something quietly changes inside many men. For years, they have been the people everyone depends on. They answer every call, lend a helping hand whenever they're needed, hold their families together, solve countless problems, and shoulder responsibilities without complaining. Then, almost without warning, they disappear. Without arguments, dramatic confrontations, or lengthy explanations, they begin to withdraw. They stop reaching out, become less available, and quietly distance themselves from people who were once central to their lives. It is not loud or obvious, it simply happens, almost in silence. If you've ever wondered why some older men suddenly distance themselves from friends and family, why they walk away from relationships they once invested in, or why they seldom return after making that choice, the answer lies in a much deeper psychological process than most people realize. For many senior men, cutting people off is not a rash decision driven by anger or resentment. Instead, it is often the final chapter of an emotional journey that has unfolded over many years. By the time a man reaches his 60s, he has typically faced his share of heartbreak, broken trust, family struggles, financial burdens, emotional disappointment, and the difficult realization that many relationships are not built on genuine appreciation or mutual respect. Unlike younger men, who often believe every problem can be solved with enough patience and effort, older men frequently arrive at a different conclusion. They stop defending themselves. They stop negotiating for acceptance. They stop trying to persuade others to recognize their value. Instead, they quietly choose peace over conflict and distance over constant disappointment. And once you understand why that happens, you'll never look at aging, relationships, or senior men the same way again. One of the strongest psychological reasons senior men cut everyone off after the age of 60 is emotional exhaustion. This is not exhaustion, which comes with aging or years of hard work. It is a much deeper form of exhaustion, one created by spending decades carrying responsibilities that often went unnoticed or unappreciated. Throughout much of their lives, many men were expected to be the provider, the protector, the dependable problem solver, and the person who remained emotionally strong no matter what they were facing inside them. Whenever a family member needed support, they stepped in. When problems arose, they handled them. During life's toughest moments, they carried the burden without expecting sympathy or recognition. As the years pass, that emotional weight becomes increasingly difficult to bear. Many older men eventually realize that while they spent a lifetime taking care of everyone else, very few people ever stopped to ask how they were doing or what they needed. Their own feelings were often pushed aside because someone else's needs always seemed more urgent. After years of putting themselves last, their perspective begins to change. By the time they reach their 60s, many feel they have already given enough patience, enough understanding, enough second chances, enough compromises, and enough emotional investment to last a lifetime. They lose the desire to keep proving their worth to people who only value them when they are constantly giving. For this reason, walking away rarely feels like revenge. Instead, it feels like freedom. They're no longer trying to meet everyone's expectations or carry emotional burdens that don't belong to them. Instead, they begin protecting one of the few resources they know is limited, their emotional energy. For many senior men, creating distance isn't about causing pain. It's about refusing to continue sacrificing their own well-being. Another powerful psychological reason senior men cut everyone off is that they eventually stop believing effort changes people. This marks one of the biggest differences between younger and older men. Younger men often believe that better communication, greater patience, deeper love, or one final sacrifice can fix almost any relationship. They hold on to the hope that people will eventually change if they're simply given enough time. Older men tend to see things differently. By the time they enter their 60s, they've witnessed the same toxic patterns repeat countless times. They have heard promises that were never fulfilled. They have forgiven the same mistakes again and again. They have watched apologies come without meaningful change. Years of experience teach them to trust consistent behavior more than reassuring words. That is why their decisions often appear sudden to everyone else. Friends and family may think an older man woke up one day and decided to disappear, but in reality, that decision was forming quietly long before anyone noticed. He may have spent months, or even years, simply observing. As repeated disrespect, manipulation, selfish behavior, or emotional games continue, he reaches a point where arguing no longer seems worthwhile. He no longer believes another conversation will transform someone's character. Instead of trying to rescue the relationship, he simply walks away. Many people mistake this quiet withdrawal for bitterness or emotional coldness. In reality, it is usually the result of wisdom gained through experience. Older men eventually understand a difficult lesson that younger men don't learn until much later: healthy relationships cannot exist when only one person is willing to grow. Once that realization takes hold, they stop negotiating, stop defending themselves, and quietly choose peace over repeated disappointment. There is also a profound identity shift that takes place after the age of 60. Many men begin redefining who they are. For decades, they may have measured their value by the roles they fulfilled: a devoted husband, a caring father, a dependable employee, or the person everyone could count on. Eventually, those identities become less important. Instead, they begin asking themselves a new question: how do I want to spend the years I have left? For many, the answer is remarkably simple. They want peace. Not constant approval. Not the pressure of always being needed. Just peace of mind. And protecting that peace changes everything. Once an older man decides his inner calm matters most, his willingness to tolerate unnecessary conflict declines dramatically. Constant criticism, emotional instability, entitlement, manipulation, disrespect, and endless drama no longer appear to be problems worth solving. They become burdens that are no longer welcome. This is why so many people are surprised when a senior man quietly distances himself. They assume he's become bitter, withdrawn, or antisocial. What they often fail to understand is that the transformation didn't happen overnight. It was taking place quietly for years. He simply reached the point where protecting his own peace became more important than protecting everyone else's expectations. Unlike younger men, who often sacrifice their own emotional well-being to preserve relationships, older men increasingly place emotional stability above almost everything else. They understand that every unnecessary argument, every toxic relationship, and every emotionally draining interaction comes with a price. And at this stage of life, that price simply isn't worth paying anymore. So rather than arguing, defending themselves, or trying to change people who have no desire to change, they quietly create distance. No dramatic exit. No lengthy explanations. Just a calm decision to spend the rest of their lives protecting the peace they spent decades searching for. Another uncomfortable truth many senior men discover after the age of 60 is that they were often valued more for what they provided than for who they were. For decades, they carried the weight of responsibility. They paid the bills, handled family crises, offered advice, solved problems, and became the dependable person everyone counted on. As long as they continued giving, they felt respected and valued. But when they finally began setting healthy boundaries, saying no, or choosing to prioritize themselves, some of those relationships started to shift. That realization can be heartbreaking. Many older men begin noticing a pattern. Certain people only seem to reach out when they need financial help, a favor, guidance, or someone to rescue them from another problem. Meaningful conversations become rare. Gratitude fades, while expectations remain unchanged. At first, they may dismiss these feelings, convincing themselves they're reading too much into the situation. But over time, repeated experiences make the pattern impossible to ignore. This changes their perspective. They begin asking themselves difficult questions. If I could no longer provide anything, would this person still want me in their life? Do they appreciate me as a person, or only for what I do? Once those questions take root, it's hard to see those relationships the same way again. Unlike younger men, who may openly express frustration about feeling taken advantage of, older men often respond differently. They become more reserved. They spend more time observing than reacting. And when they finally reach a conclusion, they rarely make dramatic announcements or demand recognition. Instead, they quietly step away. To others, their withdrawal may seem unexpected. But to the older man, it feels like a long overdue decision. He no longer wants to spend the years he has left maintaining relationships where his worth depends entirely on what he can offer instead of who he is. Another major reason many senior men distance themselves from others is that their tolerance for disrespect becomes extremely limited. This is something younger generations often struggle to understand. When men are in their 20s or 30s, they're often willing to overlook being ignored, underestimated, or taken for granted because they want to preserve important relationships. They convince themselves that patience will eventually earn appreciation. However, decades of life experience often teach a different lesson. By the time many men reach their 60s, they've learned that repeated disrespect rarely corrects itself. If someone continually ignores their boundaries, dismisses their opinions, or treats them as though they don't matter, chances are that behavior isn't going to change. Older men stop viewing these situations as isolated incidents. Instead, they recognize them as consistent patterns that reveal someone's true character. That's why many no longer hand out endless second chances. This isn't because they've become bitter. It's because they've gained clarity. They understand that protecting their dignity matters far more than preserving relationships built on a lack of respect. Many people assume older men withdraw because they're lonely, resentful, or emotionally wounded. In reality, many simply discover that solitude is far more peaceful than constantly feeling undervalued. As people age, preserving personal dignity often becomes one of life's highest priorities. A younger man may tolerate poor treatment because he's afraid of losing someone. An older man has often learned that losing his self-respect is far more damaging than losing the relationship itself. Once he believes that his dignity is no longer being honored, he usually doesn't argue or try to convince anyone to change. Instead, he quietly creates distance, not to punish others, but to protect the peace he's worked so hard to find. Another important psychological shift is that senior men become far more selective about where they invest their emotional energy. This doesn't mean they stop caring about people. It simply means they become much more intentional about who earns a place in their lives. As the years pass, many men stop measuring relationships by how many people they know and begin judging them by the quality of those connections. When they were younger, they often accepted one-sided friendships, difficult relatives, emotionally draining relationships, and people who consistently took far more than they ever gave. They believed maintaining harmony required enduring those situations. With age, however, many realize there's little value in relationships that repeatedly leave them emotionally exhausted. Psychological research suggests that as people grow older, their priorities naturally shift. They become less focused on excitement and far more interested in stability, emotional balance, and genuine connection. Senior men are no different. They lose interest in constant drama, emotional manipulation, and relationships that require endless explanations or repeated disappointments. Instead, they seek honesty, mutual respect, trust, and peace. Because of this, some people mistakenly view older men as distant or antisocial. In reality, they haven't stopped caring about others. They've simply stopped investing in relationships that never offered the same care in return. The people who remain close after the age of 60 are usually those who bring calm instead of conflict, respect instead of criticism, and understanding instead of unnecessary tension. Everyone else gradually drifts away. For many senior men, this isn't a sign of loneliness, it's a sign of wisdom and discernment. They've come to understand that one sincere, dependable relationship is worth far more than countless shallow connections. And once they experience the peace that comes from carefully choosing who deserves their time and emotional energy, very few feel any desire to return to the way they once lived. The final psychological reason senior men cut everyone off is perhaps the most misunderstood of them all. Many people believe older men withdraw because they've stopped caring about others. In reality, the opposite is often true, they've finally decided it's time to care for themselves. For much of their lives, many men put everyone else's needs ahead of their own. They devoted countless hours to their families, poured their energy into their careers, sacrificed their peace to maintain relationships, and ignored their own emotional needs so those around them could feel secure. Saying yes became second nature, and carrying other people's responsibilities became part of who they believed they were. They accepted this as the role of a good man. Then, sometime after turning 60, many begin asking themselves a life-changing question: who has been looking after me all these years? That simple question often marks the beginning of a profound transformation. They start recognizing that many of the boundaries they needed should have been set long ago. They see how much emotional energy was spent trying to satisfy people who rarely acknowledged their sacrifices. Over time, they realize that guarding their inner peace isn't an act of selfishness, it's an act of self-respect. This is why so many older men quietly step away from certain people. They're not trying to hurt anyone or settle old scores. They're simply no longer willing to live a life where everyone else's happiness comes before their own well-being. One of the biggest misconceptions is that these men no longer value relationships. The truth is, most still do. What they've outgrown are relationships based on guilt, obligation, manipulation, or endless one-sided sacrifice. At this stage of life, they value peace, dignity, honesty, and mutual respect far more than approval or popularity. The deeper psychological reality is that senior men rarely distance themselves because they dislike people. More often, they walk away because, after spending decades putting themselves last, they finally believe they deserve the same kindness, respect, and emotional security they've spent a lifetime offering everyone else. What we've explored isn't just an explanation for why some men become more withdrawn after the age of 60. It's a reflection of what happens when someone spends an entire lifetime discovering which relationships bring comfort and which quietly drain the joy from life. These decisions almost never happen overnight. A senior man doesn't simply wake up one morning and decide to disappear from everyone's life. In most cases, the choice develops slowly over many years, through repeated disappointments, emotional fatigue, broken trust, and the growing realization that protecting his peace has become essential. Many people mistakenly believe that when an older man becomes more distant, he has grown cold or resentful. In reality, he has often reached a point where he refuses to keep sacrificing his emotional health just to make everyone else comfortable. He understands that peace is valuable, and he no longer wants to invest it in relationships that constantly leave him emotionally drained. That doesn't mean every older man should isolate himself from the world. There's a meaningful difference between enjoying peaceful solitude and falling into unhealthy isolation.